sadly, our first panelist isn't currently on the call. So you have Chris Mallett from Body Swaps and Russell Watkins from Senpai. And my name is Julia Tyson, and I'm the CHRO at Lloyd's of London, and I'm also a trustee of UFI. And it's my pleasure to chair this discussion today, and hopefully it will both inform and hopefully inspire you with the art of the possible. So I'm going to be shaking up our order slightly, and I'll be asking each participant to share a perspective into the discussion, but we are keen to make sure you're really involved. So really, please add your thoughts and questions and any points of interest into the chat, and I'll try and pick them up as we go along. Obviously, the more you ask, the easier my job as chair is. And given that we're one panelist down, it would be really helpful if you contributed to the conversation. So one thing that we are keen to hear about from you is, and to get us underway, is to think about how the changing nature of work is affecting the role of L&D and how we learn in this, how the changing nature of work is affecting the role of L&D. But I'm going to start by bringing in Russell, who has kindly volunteered to talk for England, which is great. But Russell, perhaps you can start with just thinking about that question, about how the changing nature of work is affecting what you're doing and what you're thinking about.
Okay, good morning, everybody. It's a really fascinating one because there are lots of changes, and yet some of the problems remain the same as they have been for a long, long time. So manufacturing, for example, it's 20% of our economy, but it's critical for the entire economy. Services need it, retail, wholesale, buildings, etc. So about 50% of our economy and service sector is based on manufacturing. So you'll find very often that during COVID, for example, many sectors had problems getting people to work, but factories still had to run to provide things. And the kind of vocational people we have working in factories, their access to upskilling, because people couldn't come on site, other people couldn't come on site to help them, was very limited. So the problem remains, in terms of the future of work, that the hidden heroes in manufacturing, as we call them, vocationally smart, good learners, team leaders, they run small parts of factories, they are still being under supported in terms of how they need and want to learn. They don't like books, they don't want to sit in classrooms, and consultants working with them generally doesn't work so well. So what does work well for them is the ability to work around their job, and they are becoming increasingly busy. So the micro-learning, the on-demand, the kind of stuff we've done with our platform Senpai Guide, the ability for them to do it on demand is very important. But there are bigger issues here. And that's that it's becoming trickier for them to see a way through to a better working life. So it's always been the case that the ones who prosper in manufacturing and get to the higher levels of management are people who come out of university, go into the office side or maybe the engineering side, and there's often a clear pathway for them to become a manager or a director or a technical specialist. If you're on the shop floor and you're perfectly smart, it happens by accident. And I have a couple of stories. If I have time, I'll tell you very briefly, 30-second stories each. We've recently, the last 3 months, we've had various people using our app in factories around the country. One of the factories, there were 4 team leaders using it. However, there was a really strong operator, a lad called Derek. Now, Derek was an operator, so he's fully on a machine most of the time. But he asked if he could be included because he took a look at it. He's a keen gamer and wanted to get involved. So he said, yep, the management team agreed. So Derek, got to use it. Now, he used it alongside 4 official team leaders, and he outperformed each of them because he's a gamer in his own time. He was hidden in plain sight in the factory. They didn't know he was a very good learner. He's actually dyslexic. They didn't know how skilled he was, but he saved the business £3,000 in 2 weeks. So, and that's both positive and encouraging, because We've now uncovered a gem in manufacturing, but it is as ever by accident. So we need to find ways to give vocational learners clear pathways, and that's the kind of thing we're working towards, where they can see a future and they can be spotted earlier. If I have time, can I tell you the second story quickly? Certainly. And the second story is a Czech lady called Ludka, maybe early 20s, came over to work in the UK, worked on an assembly line for about 2 years. Really smart. You could tell she was really smart, but she was on the assembly line and she was trapped. It was only purely by accident, by having a conversation with her about the fact that one of her part-time hobbies is to build steam engines, that we realized that she'd be very good at something called productive maintenance, TPM, looking after the machines. So we freed her up offline, gave her some training, and gave her some digital training, actually. And then, over the course of 4 or 5 months, she made lots of improvements in the factory, and now she is an engineer. She is a production engineer studying for chartered status. But again, it happened by accident. So for the future of work, I'd like to see vocational learners have clearer pathways that can be encouraged by digital solutions that can help them in a micro-learning way make improvements.
So Russell, that's really interesting, and it is, I suppose, those are really inspiring examples. And but as you say, they're very individual. So I think what I'm keen to understand is, how have you tried to address the challenge of doing that at scale, not just for those individual examples, because the challenge for employers is how you reach the whole of your workforce, isn't it? Not just those individual conversion stories. So give us some clues, give us some thoughts.
Indeed, yeah, sure, certainly. Well, the challenge is, the real challenge is to get away from sheep dip learning, whereby the only way to avoid one to few or one to one and to go to one to many at the moment is to do sheep dip, very, very quick learning, which actually doesn't work in manufacturing in terms of upskilling and capability, because you learn through your hands, you learn by doing and making improvement and reflecting. So the challenge we have is to deliver top-notch, not sheep dip learning that's personalized, it's not vanilla, and it doesn't involve sitting in classrooms for our vocationally minded people, and doesn't involve having lots of boots on the ground in terms of trainers and coaches. So what we came up with was Senpai Guide, and I think this is the future of how to do this. So it's personalized in that it's a digital learning and process improvement tool for use directly on the shop floor. It's personalized insofar as these tools need to reflect what the user does and doesn't know. They need to be branched, and they need to reflect what they do need to learn and don't. And it's also personalized for what fires they have burning in their particular area. And by having very small upfront touches, and then leaving people with a mobile tablet that they can use on the shop floor through directed and some free range learning, and by having cadence touches throughout, you can hit an awful lot of learners, give them a mechanism that fits in around their working day, and deliver real hands-on learn a bit, do a bit training at scale. And so, for example, we've just secured an order this morning for a company with 20 team leaders. Normally, someone of my caliber to go in and help them, I would have to be there constantly. However, using something like a personalized adaptive app, I now only have to be there a quarter of the time. So, because a lot of the learning is built into the app, so you can reach 4 times and upwards the number of people with the same integrity of learning and integrity of application.
Wow. Russell, that's great, and I'm sure we'll come back to some of how you've achieved that. I'm going to welcome Donald onto the panel. It's great to see you, Donald, and glad you've overcome the tech challenge. But welcome. It would be, if you're happy to, I'd like to bring you straight into the conversation. Sure. And maybe just take that step back and just take a look at what are some of the changes in the world of work that we're experiencing, and how have they been accelerated through COVID. So let's just take that step back and set the scene.
Julia, thanks for that, and apologies everyone for being late arriving. Russell, thank you for stepping in. I really wish I'd heard what you were saying, because I love what you're doing, and I hope we can catch up later on about it. Let me do that big picture piece for 3 minutes and just look at where we are in the world of work, and therefore what it means for L&D. A lot of people think that this globe over my shoulder is a prop that I bought in a junk store. It's not. It's the world in the year of my birth, 1963, which is when my mother got her maternity clothes. She wasn't going to have any more children. She sold them, and she bought this globe with the proceeds. So it's a snapshot of the world 58 years ago, at a very different time. There's two things about this. Firstly, we know the world has moved on. The pandemic has accelerated some trends which were already underway. But in addition, a lot of the mindsets of people haven't moved on, whether they're managers, leaders, employees, or indeed people in learning and development. Those two things together lead us to a point where I think we are at a point of dislocation in work in general, and also in how L&D serves that. The big trends in terms of what's happened over those years is that, firstly, four big trends. Firstly, company value has become pretty much intangible now. You no longer rely on objects that you can touch as being the value of a company. It's all to do with the intellectual property that organizations have. We've moved to a services economy, a trend that was happening since the Second World War. Information has moved from being the core of your power to being virtually free. It's extraordinary. Knowledge was power. Now it's almost free and widely available to everybody who can get online. Not quite, but almost. And finally, we've got the globalization of trade. These are four big trends that have absolutely changed the way we work. And I summed this up by talking about Ashwin Raman, who's an 18-year-old kid. He lives with his parents. He's got a part-time job. He lives in Bangalore. His part-time job is working on the internet as a data analyst for Dundee Football Club. It's absolutely mad that he can do not a paper round, but data analysis of key players, how they're moving, how the team shapes up against other players, do scouting online for an organization that's a day's flight away. And that, for me, epitomizes the fact of these trends that are taking place right now. The way I put it is that this has led us to a world where by the way, Ashwin's a really sweet guy, and it's well worth following his blog if you're interested in football. We've reached a point in the world now where there's this dislocation. These four trends have come together and have dislocated how we used to do work. We're now adapting to the new way of doing it. And it's going to result in some challenges for people in learning and development in particular. It's also resulting in challenges for people in employment. There's no question that it's an unequal change. The better educated people are, the better they are able to adapt to it. The people particularly with high school graduation and nothing more, are less likely and less able to adapt. And I think as L&D professionals, it's our role not just to help our organizations navigate the choppy waters that we can see here, but also help individuals get the most out of themselves. Julia, I, like everybody here, can passionately talk about this for a long time, but I just wanted to set the scene in that way, that it's not just about, as the examples we always hear about Facebook and Twitter doing great things in California, it's people all over the world doing things in a way that's very different. And it's going to mean that when my kids are 58, the world is very different to how it is now. And we have to start preparing for it. Julia.
I'm really struck by the sort of that context, and I suppose just picking up a question there from Andrew earlier, that we have gone into this remote work, and the whole world has become remote and virtual, and so that's can you pick up any trends as to how it's changing our approach to learning activity and technology? Sort of not just what the trends are, but actually what activities, what do you see changing in the way that we're approaching learning activity?
The term e-learning was coined in 1999, and it took us about 20 years, up to January 2020, to get to the point where about half of training delivery was done online. And then in 4 months, suddenly 100% was being done online. And that change, that acceleration, got us to a point where two things happened. Firstly, we're not going back. The virtual world, one way and the other, digital learning is here to stay. But secondly, the mindset hasn't shifted. We're still largely in this world here, where people have what I call the schoolroom assumption that learning is something that takes place in a course that typically takes place in a classroom. And that is because we've spent, since about 1870, putting everybody through exactly the same experience from the age of about 5 to about 18. Now, if you wanted, and it doesn't matter what your class, gender, ethnicity is, everybody goes through this experience. And if you wanted to completely brainwash a society, this is exactly what you do. I'm not suggesting there's anything wrong with education. What I'm saying is that uniformity of experience means that we all tend to assume, I want to learn something, I've got to do a course, regardless of the fact, actually, we learn in many different ways. So the trends that I'm seeing in my research is a big shift towards the understanding now and the acceptance that two things. Firstly, reskilling and upskilling is crucial. And secondly, that collaborative learning and learning through digital mechanisms generally, but collaborative learning through digital mechanisms is a crucial way of doing it. Now, that's a big step away from the schoolroom assumption. I don't think people are doing it well yet. I don't think we're necessarily adjusted as organizations to doing it properly, but at least I see a glimmer of hope that people are starting to look at alternatives to the traditional approach.
Okay. Well, Chris, it'd be good to bring you in at this stage, because as one of those alternatives to the traditional approach, and in particular that challenge of how do you take an area that is so traditionally considered a classroom-based training, face-to-face, something that would normally be delivered face-to-face, such as which soft skills have always been thought of as a soft skill, as a face-to-face sort of training into. What have you been developing? And perhaps you can share the body swap story, so that we can see how and how that's really helped inform what you've been seeing over the last 18 months.
Sure. I mean, to echo what Don just said. Good morning, everyone. By the way, to echo what both Don and Russell just said, the classroom model is one-to-many transmission of knowledge, synchronous in both place and time, and not personalized. What Russell described in his worlds is a solution that is asynchronous, that is repeatable, that is personalized, that is engaging. Right, so it's not about the technology, it's about the technologies we have now allow us to learn better the way humans learn, which is in experience. And the classroom is almost the opposite of an experience. What we do with body swaps is we have essentially a flight simulator for soft skills training that uses VR and AI. But the challenge here for soft skills, so if you read the World Economic Forum, they say 1.5 billion people need to be reskilled or upskilled by 2025, and 7 out of the top 10 most in-demand skills by 2025, which is tomorrow, are soft skills. So there's two challenges here. One is the nature of the skills. The way you don't learn to swim on video, you don't learn to lead on PowerPoint. And the other problem you have is the scale. It's 1.5 billion people. So unless you can clone the coaches and make them very, very cheap, you have a problem. There's an almost impossible trade-off here between scalability and learning performance. And so what the L&D people need to do is to look at solutions, and there are many, to say, can we combine the learning performance of a practice-based approach with the scalability of a digital solution? And I think that's why apps, AR, VR, AI are very interesting to solve that challenge.
Whoops, on mute. Schoolgirl error. So Chris, do you just want to talk about how you've solved that problem of in the solution that you've been looking at, how you've solved that conundrum of scale versus learning performance? So
one concrete example I can give you is we're working with a college in the UK, so Sandwell College in Wolverhampton, so a fairly deprived area. And as a college, they train people on their hard skills. They have beauticians, they have dog groomers, social care. And that's the first part of the job of colleges. The second part is to make sure that the students actually get a job, right? Soft skills, the hard skills get you the interview, the soft skills get you the job. Now think about the provision for employability training in most colleges today. You have the career centers that offers mock interviews sometimes. The best engagement rate I've heard of is 30%. 30% of students are going to do a single mock interview of half an hour, which might be weeks, if not months, before the real thing. Now colleges are tasking teachers with training their students on job interview skill. So your beautician teacher is tasked with helping you with, storytelling and star technique and things like that. That doesn't work. Or even worse, the students are sent to online career centers that are A, expensive, and B, you can do better with a Google search. Because as Don said, knowledge is virtually free, right? So there's no way to silo that. And so what we did is we talked with them and we created a job interview simulator. But the simulator is the last part. What matters is there's modules around knowing your strengths, managing your anxiety, storytelling techniques. And it started slow. Like every college, they started very slow. They had a learning lab. They experimented, they played, and that might be my recommendation for L&D people is there's a lot of free resources out there. You can get trials of pretty much every platform for free now. So play. And they started playing. And when they saw the levels of engagement from the students in terms of caring about it, just like showing up was a first victory, getting the students to care about their skills and then watching them grow in confidence. They started involving the career center, which was on the back foot initially, but you use the data to build a use case internally. The career center started sending students, then the skills division followed, and now next year, they're hoping that all 6,000 students are going to go through the simulator. And you start now seeing the impact in terms of shortening the time from education into work. So that's a very way to apply the technology, not for technology's sake, but really to fulfill the mission of vocational education, which is to get people jobs and where they can be successful and have a nice life.
So thank you, Chris. You said something really interesting there, which I think actually echoes what Russell, you were talking about as well, which is something about having the confidence to learn, and how the solutions that you put together have to help them, people who perhaps are disengaged with traditional forms of learning, or less comfortable, and how you build that confidence. So Russell, have you anything that you'd add as advice for people who are trying to build learning solutions who are in our audience?
I wouldn't start with a learning solution. So there has to be a purpose to learning for anybody, whether you're vocational or not. There has to be a reason to learn. And that can be a reason to progress, or some people just like to learn for the accumulation of knowledge. But the persona that we have for the smart vocational learners in manufacturing, there's a user, and then there's if you like a manager above them. The managers complain constantly about they haven't got access to a talent pipeline. I'm not getting talent through. They're not coming through the funnel, and part of that is identification of talent early on, attraction, retention, and even finding them, and realizing that people who are doing jobs for £9 an hour can eventually do jobs for £100,000 a year. And a number of people fundamentally still don't believe that you can have a strong brain and be on a production line. However, from a user perspective, so there's a benefit for the management team. From a user perspective, I think it's about avoiding purgatory. So if you look at some of the people we're trying to reach in manufacturing, they're time starved and they're money starved. They're not earning a huge amount of money. They have a relentless storm every day. They are stuck between them and us in the business, and they can't see where they can go. So it's a kind of purgatory. And either you enjoy that misery for years and you embrace that, which not many do, or a way to engage people without doing anything sexy or fancy in terms of digital is just to give them a reason to learn. And the reason to learn is, if I can see it, I can be it. Give me a pathway and create an exemplar in the business where I can say, oh, hang on, I'm smart enough. He was stood next to me a year ago. Perhaps I could go down this path. And then whatever you put in terms of digital engaged learning, it has a far stronger chance of being successful. I can never answer a question quickly. I apologize.
No, you're doing fine, Russell. I'm conscious I'm not seeing much in the chat, so I just wondered if any of our audience has any questions that they want to come in with, and any points that they'd like to ask of our panelists.
Julia,
Yeah.
can I jump in with a question for Russell? I mean, I love what you're saying, Russell. I'm inspired by both Russell and Chris here, but I wanted to say you're completely right about motivation, Russell. It's where learning starts, or founders for everything. Whose job is it to provide that motivation? Is it the individual? Right. Is it the employer? Is it the state?
So in my experience and opinion, all of the above. Now, the state I'll put to one side, in that manufacturers have reluctantly agreed that we can't rely on the government or the state, and we shouldn't rely on them to try to inspire people to want to do stuff, because it just doesn't happen fast enough. Some of it has to come from within. You can lead a horse to water, and you can't make it drink. However, you can make it thirsty on the way, and this is where manufacturers and internal L&D HR people have to be really smart at making the opportunities and the possibilities visible, and trying to find the gems early. The person, I think, though, I was trained by Toyota Japanese engineers, and for them, all good learning starts with a question. So that desire to find out something more, that inherent curiosity, however small the flame is, if there's a little flame there, it can be fanned. So my answer is, it has to come from the person who wants to learn for whatever reason, and it has to come from the business who learn how to fan those flames and help them along. And the government has to create the right environment. And in my sector, in manufacturing, unfortunately, we started off down a path of an industrial strategy and a digital skills strategy, and that has gone the way of short-termism. It'll come back, you know, and we're ever optimistic, but our sector has taken things into our own hands.
If I may add something, because we've had a slightly different experience. To use the leading a horse to water phrase, there's no French translation, so I hope I understand it well, but the question is, are you assuming that the horse is thirsty to start with? And what we found working with FE colleges is we assume at the beginning that, hey, look, we have a VR solution. How fun is that? Everyone's going to want to do it. And that was a mistake we made. And when we talked to the educators, they said, do not overestimate how little motivation students have. Do not overestimate how much they care about their employability skills. And specifically in soft skills, there's a misunderstanding that because I'm young and I spend my days speaking with people, I have great communication skills. So what we found is you definitely need to lead the horse to the water. Then if the water tastes fantastic, they're going to drink a lot, but you need that. And so every college we work with has put in place some tactics, everything from making it mandatory, part of the grade, or even doing a price draw for a VR headset. But that motivation is important. And the second aspect, to an extent, is the facilitation at the beginning. And that, I think, where the role of the educator is transitioning a little bit. It's not animating a classroom anymore. It's not just reading out loud a piece of pre-written knowledge. It's educating. So it's understanding the learner, giving them the right resource, and being there for them. And also, great points, Chris. And I agree with you 100%. It's also understanding their particular pain or gain. So that diagnostic skill has to be in the person who is doing the upskilling, if you like. So, you know, for me, people will want to learn for either pain or gain. They'll want to alleviate a current pain that they have within their working or personal life, or simplistically, they'll want to gain because they want to progress, or they want to do, or they want to earn more, or they just want to learn more. So the L&D function, the trainer, the coach, we have to understand what makes that cohort and that individual tick, and try and find a way to, at scale, match the training to what's in it for me, for them, match the upskilling for them. what has to change in the culture is the box ticking, right? And it's easy to say, but you have seen it, and we have seen it. And I think one of the opportunities given by learning technology today is to build programs based on competency. What I mean by this is, how do you promote people in an organizations today? What data do you base your organizational decisions on? More often than not, you're going to ask people about their skills. So if you ask someone about their conflict resolution skills ahead of a promotion, at best, you're going to get a great story. Yeah. Now, if you put someone in a simulation of a conflict and observe them in that simulation, resolve that conflict, their performance is going to be much closer to their performance in reality. Yeah. In other words, you start to have behavioral data that is reliable in terms of predictive performance. If you extrapolate that data at scale, you can start making decisions about your organization on something that is not financial and not political. And that, I think, is a big opportunity to build programs that really target what is needed for the organization or what is needed for the individual, and measure that progression reliably. Less risk, no wastage, and everyone progresses faster.
Quite right, and with the ability we have to harvest anonymized data, we can harvest a huge amount of data points as long as we're fishing for the right data, and we can harvest data points, and we can say, look, if we have enough data points on individuals who have progressed well in certain roles in the business, we can say, look, across these 1,000 different data points for people we have, this cohort of people with this kind of background, with this kind of attitude, application, engagement, momentum, they are the ones who are likely to succeed. So therefore, if we understand our competencies that are required for a job in a practical sense, and we look at the data of what kind of person prospers for the business and for themselves in a role, then we can match that, and data can really support that journey, I think.
And there's something I think between the lines that I read in what you're saying is, and that's a notion we haven't mentioned today, is the idea of equality and diversity, and so that people are promoted on the base of their merits and on the base of the social and capital cultural that they inherited. I know of an insurance company who, to recruit salespeople, removed the CV step. So the first step was a game, like an app. Yeah. And they had all their salespeople play the app. They mapped the patterns of performance in the app against the performance of the real salespeople they had. And then they asked the candidate to play the app. And they only asked the people to come who played really, really well. And what they found is the diversity of candidates they then ended up with was massively different with what they had before. And as just one example, I think that can be extended, and that makes the whole process a lot more fair, I believe.
Oh, quite right, and it's the perfect way of doing it, because if you look at the manufacturing sector, for example, most of the people who are managing are like me, male, pale, and stale. We are 50-year-old white males, and by unconscious bias, if you look at the gender split at the very least in manufacturing, you'll find women in HR and in finance and in purchasing. On the shop floor, you'll find women on the production line. You won't find many women as operations managers. It's improving, and that's because operations directors are generally white and male, and they might not be doing it consciously, but we are still recruiting on the wrong basis. We're not finding the right talent. It is improving, but we can't afford to wait generations for age groups to flush through. We have to do the kind of thing you're talking about, I think.
Yeah.
Chris, can I ask you a question about data? Actually, sorry, I noticed Andrew's got a question in the chat. I hear lots of requests to integrate learning into workflow everyday tasks, not as a separate activity. How does the panel recommend we do this?
Can I give a quick view, Donald?
Of course.
So where Senpai Guide, where our app has been successful is not as a learning tool. It's not e-learning, it's a toolkit. And baking it into daily work means that it gives somebody a reason to use the technology and makes them comfortable with it. And it increases the chances that if there is a toolishness to it, whilst they can learn, so if you merge it into the job, whilst they can learn, then you're going to be successful. So an example, when you do lean work and you try to improve a factory, you come up with ideas or problems, and you log them on something called a problem follow-up sheet or an improvement follow-up sheet. Now that's generally on a piece of paper on the wall. So even if you've got an app that teaches them lean skills, there is a disconnect between what they're being taught and where they harvest the ideas they come up with, because they then have to go to. However, if you do what we've done and put the improvement follow-up on there, then they manage the improvement through that, and the learning becomes an incidental part of me improving my patch. They learn without thinking they're learning, because it's just a part of the job. So yes, absolutely, I'll put it into the workflow, but be careful of not overcomplicating. Just because you can make something toolish doesn't mean you've got to include every tool.
Chris.
I wanted to tell a quick story on that. So the first body swaps experience we did, we got approached by a publisher in education, and we say, let's find a good reason to use VR. So we chatted with universities, and we landed on a use case, which is to help nurses in psychiatry. Why? Because as a student nurse in psychiatry, you spend a lot of time in the classroom learning all the theory, and then you're placed in hospitals where you're supposed to be supervised. The truth is, in hospitals, you're not supervised, and so you have 20-somethings having conversations with suicidal and schizophrenic patients. That's very, very, very dangerous for everyone involved. So what we identified is, okay, there's a gap, pedagogically speaking, between the classroom and the real world. There are some situations where you cannot learn by experience. You cannot learn on the job, because learning on the job is too difficult, or too dangerous. So I don't think there's an answer which is you should systematically make all the learning part of the flow. I think it depends. If you're going to be a nurse in psychiatry, you need to spend time in the classroom. If you're going to be a pilot, you need to spend time in a simulator where there's no real people in the back, and you're not going to crash on a city. But then I think it's more in terms of like how one bleeds into the other, and how can you revisit what you learn very, very quickly. So it's about not siloing them and making them apart, but not make all the learning part of the job, because learning is an activity in and of itself.
Okay. No, and it really just shows the conundrum that there always has been for learning, isn't it? And that we now have a wider range of solutions, but we still have the same problems. And identifying that learner motivation, first of all, is one, but certainly finding the right solution to support that. I just wonder, we've got 2 minutes left. I just wondered, Donald, if you were to just sort of summarize in terms of any advice for our audience in terms of how we make digital learning a core part of an employer's learning strategy, what would you say?
I think we shouldn't start with the idea that it should be digital learning. What we should say is, what are we trying to achieve from the individual and the organizational point of view? What tools best fit that? And then make the case to individuals and to the business on the basis of meeting their goals, rather than the basis of, as you were saying, Chris, hey, we've got a VR set, what use can we find for it? Which is the backwards way of doing it. So I'd always start with the goal of the organization, but to Russell's point, motivation is everything. We have to meet the needs of the individual to get them involved. Out of that, inevitably, there's a whole suite of digital solutions that will provide an answer. And I'm not going to recommend them because things change too fast and every context is different. But I will say this, everybody who works in learning and development needs to build a strong network to understand what's happening and what's changing in the field, so that they can be well informed to follow up that discussion they have with the business. So first you have the discussion about aims, and then from your network, be well informed about how you can then go ahead and meet those aims.
Which is a beautiful segue. Thank you to all our panelists, to Russell, Chris and Donald. Certainly, let's segue back into this network. It's great to have you all with us. Hopefully you've taken some really interesting points away and how you can use, how you can think about your future learning strategies. So let's go back and rejoin the main event. Thank you all.